Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Eagles and the Texans this weekend. I talk about Houston domination. Just how dominant has it been? Well, the Eagles have never lost to a Houston-based team. Ever, ever, ever. Not the Texans, not the Oilers, nobody. And that's who they'll face tomorrow night. You can listen to the game right here on 97.3 ESPN as the Eagles are in Houston to take on the Texans. And, of course, the Eagles are looking to be 8-0 for the first time in franchise history. They lost the 8th game in 2004. I want to say that was against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This will be the Houston Texans. Geoff Mosher, what's going on, buddy? How are you?
Great, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. And, 7-0 against the Steelers. They lost that game. I think it was the Steelers, if my memory serves. This time they're a 14-point favorite on the road on a Thursday night, looking for a 5-game road win streak, which is the longest active streak in the NFL. They haven't won more than 5 straight road games since going back to the Andy Reid era when they won 9 in a row. But is this the kind of game that worries you at all? Do you look at this game and say, hey, everybody, don't take the Texans 1-5-1 lightly on this Thursday night?
It really doesn't worry me. I know I could wind up being wrong, but I can't find – these are always the dangerous games too. And I thought this about Washington first time around. I thought maybe that was a team that was starting to get some things together. They had played well. I think they beat the Jaguars, and they were on a 2-game winning streak, Washington, and then obviously the Eagles housed them. So, but I mean, look, this is a bad team. Doesn't have a lot of very good players. One of their better players, Nico Collins, is out. So they've got some health issues. We have no idea. They're listing Brandon Cooks, probably their best overall offensive player, as questionable. He's seemingly disgruntled because he did not get traded, which is always a first in the NFL. They're a bad defensive team. They are not a good offensive team either. There's just not a whole lot of ways to convince yourself that the Eagles can lose this game unless they just have one of those games where they uncharacteristically give the ball away 3 or 4 times. And no one can ever predict when that kind of game is going to happen. And maybe it could, but there's no way the Houston Texans just line up and beat the Eagles without forcing some type of, cosmic driven turnovers or doing something totally extraordinary.
One thing I want to kind of zone in on to start the conversation here is a big 14-point spread. As we said, heavy favorite. They've never lost. They're 7-0. They're 5-0 all-time against the Texans. They lead the league in a plus 14 turnover margin. So let's start with that. How are they doing this? What is it about their defense that is forcing and causing havoc and so many turnovers?
Well, so there's 2 questions in that. First of all, it starts with the turnover ratio that they are plus 12, I believe, or no, plus 14, like you said, right?
Plus 14,
and that is a large part because not only are they a takeaway defense, but they have only given the ball away 2 times this year. So they are the only team in the league that has not lost a fumble. So the takeaways are good too that they're getting. That's a big part of it, but it's not like they're far above the rest of the NFL in takeaways. I think they have 16, the Ravens have 15, if I'm not mistaken, or something of that nature. You may have the stats in front of me. It's the fact that they don't give the ball away. I mean, just think about that over the course of 7 games. When you get extra or you get your normal number of possessions because you never give the ball away, and you get extra possessions because you take the ball away, which gives you short fields and momentum swinging type of momentum there, or pendulum swinging momentum. That to me is the number one reason why the Eagles are undefeated. I mean, you can talk about individuals, and they're certainly a big part of it, but opportunity like that is how you win in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing, they're plus 14 turnover. The plus 14 turnover margin, which is just unbelievable. They've only turned the ball over twice on the offensive side of the ball. And the amount of touches that Jalen Hurts has, for them to only have 2 turnovers, and one was an interception that bounced off of somebody's
Kenny
hands.
Gainwell's hands.
Right,
Yep.
exactly. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But I think it's the way they're getting the turnovers on defense that stands out to me, Geoff. It is interceptions, it's fumbles, it's a multitude of things, pressure, forcing. They're getting it in a variety of ways, and that tells me that maybe they can keep this up on the defensive side of the ball.
I think so. Well, yeah, they can keep up at this rate. It's sort of maybe it is sustainable. I don't know which one of these two is unsustainable. I think they're both so far to the extreme as far as having only one real, quote unquote, real turnover in 8 games. And then, the number of takeaways that they're getting defensively. I think the most impressive part about it, because you asked the question, how are they able to take the ball away so much? I mean, first part about it is talent, right? I mean, you added C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I think he has 4 or 5 of those interceptions. You added James Bradbury. He's got at least 2, if I'm not mistaken. You are much better at the linebacker level, and you added a guy like Hassan Reddick, who has a couple of forced fumbles himself. So the number one answer is always talent in the NFL. The Eagles have not had this type of collection on talent from front to back since maybe the Jim Johnson 2002, 2003 days when they were a real elite defense. I don't even think it was this elite in 2017. To be honest with you. So that's the number one reason. We could talk about coaching and scheme, and yes, they do things to confuse quarterbacks. Yes, they hit quarterbacks. But the reason why they do these things, the reason why they get to the quarterback and hit them, the reason why they're able to take away plays is because they have really good players at positions where in the past, especially over the last 10 years or so, they haven't always had at that position.
Hey, with Jordan Davis out, he plays about 35, 40% of the snaps recently here. Do you think that changes play call? Does it change what we're talking about? Are guys forcing turnovers, getting pressure because of Davis's presence? Is it not a big deal? Kind of give me your thoughts on how he will change John Gannon's play call.
So I don't think it's going to change much as far as takeaway opportunities, because he's not a third down player. He's not yet a player who's out there in nickel, sort of occupying blockers while other people's feast off of that. He's usually a run down player. It's a short turnaround from losing him. So I don't think that they're going to be able to do anything sort of unconventional schematically. What I do think they're going to have to do is sort of go back to what they did last year when they didn't have a player of Jordan Davis's size and skill set. They still played a 5-man front, but instead of 2 overhang players like you see now, I think they're going to probably have 4 down linemen, which would be at the ends. You'll probably see Brandon Graham and Josh Sweat as ends. You'll see Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox as tackles, and you'll see Hassan Reddick as the stand-up overhang player. Last year, that guy was Jannard Avery, and then Jannard Avery would come off the field when it's time to rush the passer. This time, Hassan Reddick will stay on the field as an overhang, and then one of those other 4 that I mentioned at different times will come off the field as they get into a 4-man rush, which is what I still think they're going to do. So the key is, will that be – by doing what I just said that they will do, it'll still give them a 5-man front, and it'll still prevent the offense from getting double teams in the running game, unless they want to add an extra tight end and do it that way. So I think, obviously it's going to be a little bit of a hit in the running game because it's such a massive guy and he can do so many things for you both laterally and north-south. But I still think they're going to play a 5-man front and try to make sure that
who fills
the
that
offense
role?
Has trouble running the ball.
Who fills that 5-man role? Who gets those snaps?
So in this case, it would probably be Brandon Graham, because I think that he'll, if what I'm guessing is correct, he and Josh Sweat will be sort of hand in the dirt defensively, or maybe they'll stand one of them up. We'll see. But I think they're going to go 4 down linemen with 1 overhang.
You get the sense, Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com, do you get the sense that there's a bigger role for Robert Quinn coming, or what we saw last week, is that going to be it?
Well, I think there is, and it's just tough because, he played his first game, and then you only have 3 days in between the next game. It's tough to – at some point, I feel like they will get a NASCAR type of package, Mike, going on where you're throwing, say, Hassan Reddick and Quinn out there to play the edges, right? And you're moving Brandon Graham inside next to Fletcher Cox, which isn't a full throttle NASCAR, because NASCAR is usually 4 defensive ends on the field, but because Fletcher Cox is a really good pass rusher. It has that. This is what they rushed the passer with in 2017 with Jim Schwartz when they bring Chris Long in, move Brandon Graham inside, take Vinny Curry off, and hit you with a Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Chris Long, Derek Barnett pass rushing package.
Yeah, we used to see, as you mentioned, Vinny Curry kind of in that tackle spot there, and he was a bigger defensive end. I'm wondering, do they have the personnel to kind of pull that off again? Similar.
Yeah. Again, Vinny actually came off on pass rush at that point of his career because they brought Chris Long and Derek Barnett in and moved BG inside with Cox. So, and I think that they have actually just as much, if not more, talent to pull that off on third down by still moving Brandon inside.
Right.
And by the way, if they can ride the hot hand, if Javon Hargrave has a game like he did Sunday against the Steelers, then you say,
well,
why did Hargrave will be in
Why
there.
did Hargrave – I was going to ask you that. You guys, I think Adam kind of went a little bit further on Inside the Birds podcast about this. But why did Hargrave finally have – because remember last year he got off to a great start sacking the quarterback. He has not had the sacks. That doesn't mean he's not playing well, but why was he finally able to kind of get his on Sunday?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some of his slow start, we sort of forgot about this, but he missed almost all of training camp with a toe injury that I believe was turf toe because – he was out for a really long time. He had to have been out since like day 5 or 6 and almost for the entirety of camp. So it's very possible that he just did not have the conditioning for the first month and a half. It's not like he's had a terrible first 8 games. He just hasn't had what you said, the kind of start that he had last year when he was on his way to his first Pro Bowl. So we'll see. I mean, he definitely looked like he was shot out of a cannon against the Steelers. I think the Steelers' offensive line is also a part of that. But when you have Cox, Hargrave, Robert Quinn, Hassan Reddick, and BG, that's 6 guys right there. What it allows you to do if you're Jonathan Gannon is A, have multiple pass rush lines if you want, and B, it allows you to ride the hot hand. So if you think you're gone 2 weeks and the guy's just really not, looking as good as the other, then you just throw the best 4 pass rushers on the field. Or you can even blitz a little bit more than you normally do.
Well, with that, today, Nick Sirianni was asked about his run defense, 5.1 yards a carry. Does he have some concern? Now you're taking Jordan Davis out of the middle there. What is this? Do you think, Geoff, this is just – because one thing Houston can do is run the ball. Is this a team that is not a good run-stopping team?
Yeah, so Nick tried to say, and he was right about this. If you go back to the Steelers game, most of their big runs came in the second half when the Eagles were well ahead and very happy to let the Steelers run and let the clock go down. Because at halftime, Najee Harris had 4 carries for 0 yards, and he is their main running back. I think the longest run against them in the first half was that end around by either Jalen Warren or somebody else. So he was right that the number was skewed by Pittsburgh having a better second half, which is intentional. But there have been times this year where the Eagles, specifically when they're in a 4-man front. So when the Eagles think the team is passing and the team then springs a run on them and allows the 5 offensive linemen to block 4 and get a double team, that's when teams have run successfully against the Eagles, which is, again, why I think they're still going to show a 5-man front without Jordan Davis to prevent those guys from getting double teamed in the middle there. So I still think they'll be formidable against the run when they need to be. And I just don't think Houston, maybe I'll be wrong about this, but I think 99 out of 100 people who watch the Eagles and watch Texans would agree that there's no way Houston can just sit there and run their way to a victory against the Philadelphia Eagles. Nobody else has been able to do that. So I don't know why the Texans.
Well, if you watch the Texans play last week, the game here should be like a Navy Air Force game. I mean, they should just be running the ball. I think Derrick Henry's still getting yards on the Houston defense. Their defensive front is horrible. There is one thing that I find interesting. In football, and I don't know if it's just the Eagles, but you get a lead, and rarely do you feel comfortable taking starters off the field. The Eagles' offense had their entire reserve package out there.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Gannon was asked about why he hasn't replaced his secondary and got guys into the game, and he kind of insinuated that he talked to Sirianni and maybe was shut down by Sirianni. Did you get that? Did you see that? Like, why?
I thought it was strange even from the start that the offensive guys got a rest and the defensive guys didn't. And I don't know. I can't really put my finger on why you would do
Well,
that.
my question really was, did they not trust McPherson and Scott and the rest of those guys and the safeties so much so, because on defense, you give up one big play, it can turn the game back around. And did they not trust those guys so much that they don't even want to put them in with a 3-score lead in the fourth quarter?
Well, if that's the case, I would say that, that's like one example, maybe the only example this year you have seen of maybe questionable coaching or decision-making or a lack of trust. Like, you don't have to replace every single guy on defense. You can pull out Darius Slay and have McPherson get in there. And then when you're comfortable, you can pull out Bradbury and put some see that the corner issue I can kind of understand, because after McPherson, Job was not playing. He hasn't played all year. And Josiah Scott got hurt. So it might have been a little bit difficult. But it is when you look at it, it's, at safety, you pull one guy and put in Kayvon Wallace, but then the other guy's like, well, why do I have to play? You pull one guy. They don't have a whole lot of great backups at those positions.
No, Nakobe Dean. He hasn't pulled the linebackers either. Somebody asked me this before, and I'm thinking, one thing with the lead is I want to see how these guys react to the speed of the game. Just give them a little taste of the speed of the game. Are you saying you don't trust Nakobe Dean enough to give him a series up 3 scores? I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's certainly something that if somebody had gotten hurt there in the last 5 minutes of the game, that I think that would leave them open to judgment. I mean, you saw what happened with Cooper Kupp, right, in playing in the meaningless game, and then he hurt his ankle, and then the coaching staff got raked over the coals for it.
Yeah. Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast. And we just talked about it. Derrick Henry ran crazy on this team. Is that tomorrow night? Short week, run the ball, baby?
Yeah, it's a perfect storm for the Texans, I guess, because the Eagles are going to come in, and I spoke with Jason Avant about this and Quinn Michael, and they said, on a short week, you tend to really go back to the basics. He even said you kind of do what you did against the Steelers, or whoever you played the week before, because it's what you practiced the week before and you're most comfortable with. So, I don't think they're going to run like 80% of the plays, but I think they will look for shot plays again, because they'll probably be there. But when they need to rely on their run game and keep it simple, they'll be able to do that. And I have a feeling they're going to get some big gains in the run game.
Yeah, this is a Tampa 2 Lovie Smith. This is run game here. Geoff, real quick.
So interestingly, though, Jason did say, and I haven't watched, I cannot say I've watched a lot of Texans this year, because, that would be bad. Jason did say that Lovie Smith is not playing a cover 2 pure the way he did when he was Chicago's coordinator in Chicago, because he just doesn't have the personnel to be able to do that. So he is doing some things differently defensively.
All right, well, we'll see tomorrow night. You can hear the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. One last thing, the trade deadline yesterday, they got Quinn. Were they in on anybody? Were you surprised they didn't add anything else? What do we know?
Yeah, we have it all detailed on Inside the Birds that dropped this morning. So there were discussions that we know of. Adam and I both heard from separate sourcing that there was some discussions with the Browns involving Hunt, and there was probably Kareem Hunt, probably a time in which Eagles may have felt that a deal would be done, and things change. Obviously Cleveland didn't trade him to anybody. They won the other night. He played well. I'm speculating for Cleveland, but if he leaves at the end of the year and signs a decent deal, it helps them in the comp pick formula. So they may have been looking for a specific type of pick in return that was going to be equal or better than whatever they'd get as a comp pick. Maybe it's hard to figure it out. But if he were to have been traded, from what we understand, the Eagles were probably the front runner there.
Yeah, he would have added a nice piece to this offense.
The big thing is people were talking about Nyheim Hines and
good pass catcher,
but that's really not what the Eagles need. They don't need a running back, but if you're going to be smart and try to look toward the future, you're going to say, well, Miles Sanders is doing such a great job for us, but he gets hurt a lot. And if he were to go down, are we comfortable with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott and Trey Sermon as a committee, or could we do better than that? And that's where I believe that they would look more toward a guy like Kareem Hunt, who could be and has been in his career a 3-down back or a lead back in a committee, as opposed to getting a Nyheim Hines who's just going to come in here and not be that kind of guy if Miles Sanders went down.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds. The new podcast dropped this morning. Check that out tomorrow. What time is the Inside the Birds pregame show?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
Inside the Birds YouTube channel and our other social media channels. 5 o'clock.
All right. So those guys will have the pregame. Andrew will be previewing it with us for Football at 4. Adam's back on Friday to recap it all. And, of course, Moshe on Monday here as the Eagles have an interesting stretch. Look, these games against bad teams, but this is a chance for the Eagles to really start to push away for that number 1 seed because Minnesota, who got better, by the way, Dallas, the Giants, Minnesota and Dallas play each other. The Giants play Dallas and Minnesota. You could really separate yourself for that number 1 seed. This is a start of it. Thursday night, you can really start to pull away with this part of your schedule.
Absolutely.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you Monday.
Go Phillies.